This is the third video in a four-part series exploring the history of agrarian civilizations. In the first two videos, we saw how agrarian civilization after agrarian civilization rose and fell in Afro-Eurasia from 3000 BC to 1000 CE, and how across time more and more land came under state control. In this video, we'll take a look at the civilizations that arose in the American world zone prior to the landing of the conquistadors in the 16th century who ended the native empires. Beyond Afro-Eurasia and the Americas, no agrarian civilization arose in the other two world zones, Australasia and the Pacific Islands. Unlike in Afro-Eurasia, the story of agrarian civilization in the Americas is much shorter and includes far fewer players. The Americas include both North and South America, and then there's the cultural area of Mesoamerica, which is an area defined by a shared culture in much the same way that Mesopotamia is defined, rather than a more natural geographical definition. Mesoamerica sits near the center of the American world zone at the southern tip of North America. In Mesoamerica, civilization came to be, but beyond that, in North America, no agrarian civilization arose. And in South America, there emerged the largest of the American civilizations, the Incas. We'll start with North America. No agrarian civilizations had yet arisen by the time Europeans arrived. Now we'll look at Mesoamerica. In Mesoamerica, by about 1400 BC, the Olmecs were around, and they were flourishing by 1200 BC. But despite fighting wars, building 100-foot pyramids, and carving humongous basalt heads, they never reached the level of an agrarian civilization, and it remains unclear just how much of an influence they had on the cultures that followed in the region. By 300 BC, Olmec culture was in decline, but not to worry. In the Yucatan Peninsula, the Mayans had gotten going, and closer by, a group of distinct communities had settled atop a mesa, which is an elevated flat surface rising non-gradually above a surrounding plain. This settlement became their capital city, and the Zapotec people had come to be in the Oaxaca Valley, and by around 200 BC they began taking control of nearby provinces. The population reached an estimated 17,200 by 100 BC. By 150 CE, the population was larger still, and around the mid-millennium, decline had begun. But the site remained occupied until 850 CE. While the Zapotec had entered into decline, there emerged on the Mexican plateau a collection of city-states, and by 400 CE, the population of these 6 states may have reached as high as 80,000 people. The most significant of those cities, Teotihuacan, climbed rapidly in population, building their largest pyramid around 200 CE, and likely reaching higher than 150,000 inhabitants by 450 CE, making it the 6th largest city in the world. Teotihuacan collapsed between 550 and 750 CE, and their city, or at least the properties of the elites, were burned. Moving now to the Yucatan Peninsula and moving back to around 500 BC, a culture we know as the Mayans had cities and temples and a writing system, and they had the concept of zero independently of the articulation of this idea in India. The Mayans weren't a unified civilization and were more like the early Sumerians and consisting of numerous city-states. They reached their height from around 250 to 900 CE, with the city of Tikal and the surrounding countryside having a combined 100,000 inhabitants in 750 CE. Much of the Mayan sites were abandoned starting about 760 CE, with the exception of Chichen Itza, which lasted until around 1250. Moving back to the Basin of Mexico and moving forward 75 years after the 1250 CE end of the last lone Mayan city of Chichen Itza, around 1325 CE, a semi-nomadic group settled down and settled themselves on an island surrounded by far more powerful peoples. They soon began participating with their warring neighbors by hiring themselves out as mercenaries. They improved their agriculture with chinampas surrounding the island, and when they were powerful enough, their men started fighting in their own name. By 1428, these Mexica of the island Tenochtitlan and the 2 surrounding city-states teamed up, and thus were born the Aztecs. And with less than 100 years before the Europeans arrived and soon toppled their empire in 1521, they established a tribute-giving empire ruling some 3 to 10 million people. Moving down south to South America, to the highlands of the rising Andean mountain chain, and to the midlands and coastal lowlands to their west, we're now in the region where the greatest empire of the Americas would arise, and as early as 1000 BC, there's already a state in this area. The earliest definitive evidence of a state in South America is that of the town, not city, Chavin de Huantar, which arose around 1000 BC. The town flourished from 800 to 300 BC and may have reached as much as 3,000 inhabitants. Chavin had declined by 300 BC, but new, larger town-states would soon arise. These new town-states, such as the Nazca, who flourished from 100 to 800 CE, leaving us enigmatic, though clearly significant line drawings, and the other town-state of the Mochica from 300 to 700 CE, they control territory from the coastal lowlands up through the midlands and into the highlands of the Andes, thereby bringing under their domain a wider variety of resources. The Wari, based on the city of Ayacucho, and the Tiwanaku of Lake Titicaca, arose towards the end of the first millennium, and shortly thereafter, a multiple century-long drought began in 1050, which saw the weakening and falling apart of these states. Around 1200 CE, a group of people from the region of Lake Titicaca settled at Cusco, and after securing their area, the Incas began expanding their domain around 1438, just 10 years after their northern counterparts, the Aztecs, had come to be through their Triple Alliance. Despite having no currency or written language, they managed to build the largest empire in the Americas prior to European contact. Their complex and not yet understood means of communicating through knotted strings aided in running this empire, which ruled over 80 ethnically and linguistically distinct provinces. In the 1460s, expansion ended under the grandson of Pachacuti, who had started it back in 1438. From modern Ecuadorian Quito down to Santiago, Chile, the Incans ruled a 2,500-mile-long empire. The last Incan emperor was executed by the Spanish in 1533, and the last Incan stronghold fell in 1572. Full-scale agrarian civilizations emerged in two regions in the Americas, Mesoamerica and the Andean region. They emerged significantly later than in Afro-Eurasia, perhaps in part because of the later arrival of humans to the Americas. There were other limitations as well. None of these civilizations had quality travel or pack animals, like the Afro-Eurasians. Agrarian civilizations did arise, however, and as this story was heating up in this lone American world zone with the largest yet empires ruling in their respective domains in Meso and South America, and having not yet run into each other and started trading and waging much bigger wars than had yet been seen in the world zone, before all of this could unfold, in whatever way it may have, the world zones became lone no more. And importantly for this story, a man by the name of Hernan Cortez arrived in the Americas in 1504, and in 1519 he head out to secure the interior of Mexico so that it could be colonized, and less than 2 decades later the two greatest civilizations of the Native American world had fallen.